snow came in sideways that November night, the kind that stings your face like thrown gravel and turns headlights into smeared halos of pale gold. Out on Route 9, 3 miles east of Crestwood, the road was empty in both directions. No trucks, no late commuters, nothing but the whisper of wind through the Douglas firs and the occasional crack of a frozen branch giving up somewhere deep in the dark. Tessa Calloway heard the tire blow before she felt it. A sharp concussive pop, like a rifle shot, and then the wheel yanked hard to the right. She fought it, both hands white-knuckling the steering wheel, foot pumping the brake the way her uncle had taught her when she was 16 in a parking lot in Eugene. The Honda Civic fishtailed across the center line tires, screaming against packed ice before it finally shuddered to a stop on the gravel shoulder. She sat there for a moment in the sudden stillness, the engine ticking as it cooled her breath, coming fast and shallow. Then she pressed her forehead against the steering wheel and closed her eyes. She was 2 months behind on the car insurance. She had $47 in her checking account until Friday. It was 11:23 at night, the temperature was dropping through the floor, and her phone showed exactly 1 bar of signal out here, where the pines crowded close to the road and blocked everything useful from the sky. She got out. The cold hit her like an open hand. Her uniform jacket, the thin burgundy one with the Rusty Spoon logo stitched above the left breast pocket, was not built for this. It was built for carrying plates of country fried steak across a linoleum floor to men who needed their coffee refreshed every 12 minutes. It was not built for standing on a dark highway shoulder in November while the wind came down off the Cascades with genuine malicious intent. She looked at the tire, flat as a confession. The rim was already kissing gravel. She looked at her phone. 1 bar, then none, then one again, trembling at the edge of existence. She thought about calling someone. Her friend Jolene worked the night shift at the gas station on Harker Street, but that was 4 miles in the wrong direction. The tow companies in Crestwood stopped answering after 10. AAA was something she had been meaning to sign up for since she was 19. She was 22 now. Tessa put the phone in her jacket pocket and made the only decision available to her. She would walk. The shortcut through the Greer Woods had been a part of her geography since childhood. She had walked it in summer with fireflies threading through the sword ferns, in autumn when the maples went the color of old copper. She knew where the trail dipped down into the gully near the old logging creek, knew where the ground went soft after rain, knew the particular smell of the air, where the cedars gave way to open meadow half a mile from the edge of town. She did not know it at night in November in the snow, but she told herself it was fine. 1.5 miles through the trees to Old Miller Road, then another half-mile to her apartment on Kessler Street. She had a small flashlight on her keychain. She had her phone with its dying bar of signal. She had 2 years of double shifts in early mornings and late nights that had stripped most of the fear out of her and replaced it with something more practical, a tolerance for discomfort, a talent for putting one foot in front of the other when the situation offered no better options. She locked the car. She turned on the keychain flashlight. She stepped off the highway's shoulder and into the trees. The woods swallowed the sound of the highway almost immediately. That was the first thing that struck her as wrong. Not wrong in any way she could name. Not wrong in a way that would hold up if she tried to explain it to someone later. Just wrong the way a familiar room feels wrong when the furniture has been moved 2 inches to the left. Everything technically the same, but the geometry slightly off. The flashlight threw a small pale cone of light across the snow. The beam caught the undersides of branches, the silver skin of alder trunks, the slow drift of flakes through the air above her head. Her boots crunched through the icy crust with each step, each footfall sounding startlingly loud in the quiet. That was the second thing. The quiet. In the Greer Woods on a summer night, you heard everything. Owls working the upper canopy, frogs down in the creek bed, the skitter of small animals through the undergrowth. Even in autumn, there was wind through the leaves, the percussion of acorns dropping the dry rustle of things moving through the ferns. Tonight, there was nothing. Not silence in the comfortable sense of the word, not the peaceful absence of sound. This was a different quality entirely. This was the silence of hell breath. The silence of everything that lived in these woods, having gone still and low and quiet for a reason that had nothing to do with the snow. Tessa pulled her jacket tighter and walked faster. She was halfway to the gully when she stopped. Her hand tightened around the keychain flashlight. She stood completely still on the trail, her breath pluming white in front of her face, and she listened. There it was again. A sound from somewhere below her, down in the hollow where the logging creek ran shallow over smooth stones. Low and broken and unmistakably a sound of pain. Not a dog. She had heard enough hurt dogs in her life to know the difference. This was something rawer than that, something with a frequency that got under the skin and pulled at something old and involuntary in the chest. It sounded like a child crying at the bottom of a well. She should keep walking. She knew she should keep walking. The rational calculus was clear enough. She was a 22-year-old woman alone in the woods at 11:30 at night in a snowstorm with $47 and a dying phone. Whatever was making that sound in the dark below her was not her problem. It could be an injured deer. It could be a trick of the wind through the gully rocks. It could be something she did not want to meet in the dark at all. Tessa Calloway had grown up in a house where her mother, before the stroke that had taken the sharp edges off her memory and landed her in the care facility in Seattle, had maintained one inflexible rule. You do not walk past something that is hurting if you have the ability to help. That was not sentiment. That was not softness. That was the only thing that separated decent people from the other kind. She stepped off the trail. The embankment dropped away, steeply frozen mud and pine duff crumbling under her boots as she picked her way down toward the creek bed. The flashlight beam swept across snow-covered rocks and the dark shapes of fallen logs until it found the gully. And then she saw him. He was tucked into the hollow where a massive Douglas fir had come down years ago, the rotting trunk creating a kind of accidental shelter from the wind. He was small, smaller than she had expected from the intensity of that sound. Silver-furred and barely the size of a beagle, his body trembling in continuous fine vibrations that had nothing to do with the cold, though the cold was certainly not helping. A wolf pup. His left foreleg was caught in a steel-jawed trap, the serrated teeth of it buried deep in the soft tissue above the paw, the chains staked into the frozen ground with brutal efficiency. The leg had been in the trap long enough that the surrounding fur was dark and matted. Not minutes. Hours. Tessa crouched at the edge of the hollow close enough now to see the animal's eyes when he registered her presence and lifted his head. She had expected fear. Aggression, maybe. An injured animal in a trap was a dangerous animal. Any reasonable person knew that. What she had not expected were the eyes themselves. They were amber. Not the ordinary amber of a dog's eyes, that warm brown gold. That was simply the biological consequence of melanin and light. This amber was different in a way she could not have articulated, but felt in the base of her spine. This amber was aware, specific. Looking at her not the way an animal looks at a potential threat, but the way something looks at you when it is trying to decide whether or not you can be trusted with something important. She sat down in the snow, not because it was a good idea, because something in those eyes asked her to stop looming over him, and her body had responded before her brain caught up. "Hey," she said quietly. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I see you, it's okay." The pup made a sound that was not quite a whimper and not quite a growl, something in between, something that communicated both pain and the effort of trying to manage it with dignity. She looked at the trap. She had never seen one up close before, but she recognized the design from the wildlife conservation articles she had read in the waiting room of the county clinic. Serrated steel jaws and a coiled spring mechanism, the kind that had been banned in Douglas County since 2018 under the Oregon Wildlife Protection Code. The kind that a legitimate hunter would not have and a legitimate researcher would not need. The stake driven into the frozen ground was heavy gauge, set deep. This had not been laid carelessly. Someone had placed this trap here deliberately in a specific location and checked the mating of the jaws against the stake before walking away. She looked at the batch number stamped into the steel of the chain link. She did not know what it meant. Not yet. She looked back at the pup. "Okay," she said. "I'm going to help you. I need you to let me." He snapped at her when she reached toward the trap, the first time a warning rather than a genuine attempt to bite his small teeth, clicking shut on the air 6 inches from her knuckles. His eyes never left her face. "I know," she said. "I understand, but I need to touch it." She sat back and thought for a moment. Then she took off her jacket. The cold was immediate and total, like stepping into a freezer, the night air against her bare arms sharp enough to make her breath stutter. She wrapped the jacket around the pup's body, not restraining him, just creating warmth and a barrier, letting him feel the weight of it, letting him understand that she was not trying to trap him further. She talked while she did this low, and even the same tone she used with the more difficult customers at the diner, the ones who came in raw from something and needed the world to be gentle for 20 minutes. Then she found a section of fallen branch pine about 2 feet long and 3 inches thick, mounted with enough rigidity to function as a lever. She had read about the mechanism of these traps. The spring tension was the obstacle. If you could compress the spring on both sides simultaneously, the jaws would release. With the right leverage, it was theoretically possible for one person. With cold hands and a trembling animal and blood, making the steel slick and the ground frozen solid beneath the stake theoretically possible was doing a lot of work. She positioned the branch under the jaw on the near side, found the fulcrum point against the hinge, and pushed. The pain in her palms was immediate. The spring resisted with a mechanical indifference to her effort to the cold, to the sound the pup made when the vibration of the lever transmitted through the chain to his trapped leg. She pushed harder. Her shoulders shook. The muscles along her lower back sent up a formal complaint that she set aside completely. She pushed until her vision went slightly gray at the edges, and she thought she was not going to be able to do it, that this was the specific shape of her failure tonight, that she had come down here, into the dark and the cold, and she was going to have to stand up and walk away and live with that. She pushed harder. Something gave. Not broke, not snapped. Gave the way old resistance gives reluctantly, and all at once the spring yielding under the sustained pressure and the jaw on the near side dropping a full inch. She scrambled her hand to the second jaw, burning her palm on the frozen steel, and wrenched both sides down simultaneously. The trap opened. The pup dragged his leg free. The sound he made doing it was one she would not easily forget. He scrambled back against the rotting log and held his injured leg up, his whole body shaking, and looked at her. She looked at the leg. The damage was real but survivable if treated quickly. She had a basic first aid knowledge that she had accumulated not from any formal training, but from years of minor workplace injuries at the diner, in a wilderness survival manual she had found in the Crestwood Library, and read cover to cover on slow Sunday afternoons because it seemed like the kind of knowledge that might matter someday. She began to tear a strip from the bottom hem of her work shirt. She was still looking at the leg, her cold fingers working at the fabric, when the smell hit her. She had no reference point for the smell, no experience that corresponded to it, but her body understood it before her mind did. Musk and rot and the copper of stale blood, and something underneath both of those things that was more elemental and more wrong then either a smell like violence itself rendered into sensation. Her hand stopped moving. She looked up. There were three of them on the ridge above the gully. They stood at the lip of the embankment in the way that predators stand when they have found their prey contained, and the outcome is not yet in question. The one in the center was the largest. Ragged clothing and the kind worn past the point of function, as if clothing itself had become merely incidental. Their skin in the flashlight beam had a grayish undertone that had nothing to do with the cold. Their eyes caught the light wrong. Not the red-eye effect of animal tapetum, not the reflective flat shine of nocturnal creatures. Something else. Something that the light seemed to fall into rather than reflect off of. The one in the center spoke. Well, his voice carried the particular casualness of someone who had never once had to consider the consequences of what they were about to do. Looks like the appetizers arrived early. Tessa stood up slowly. She stepped in front of the pup. She did not make a decision to do this. Her body simply moved, and she was standing between the injured animal and the three figures on the ridge. Her jacket gone, her work shirt torn at the hem, her keychain flashlight held in a hand that was absolutely steady. "Stay back," she said. The one in the center laughed. It was a wet barking sound with nothing human in it. "Hand over the runt, girl. Maybe we make it quick." She looked down at the pup for 1 second. He was looking up at her. His amber eyes had not changed. They were still that specific, aware gaze, still holding that quality of assessment, and she thought of hope. He was 7 years old. She did not know that yet. She would learn it later in a room that smelled of mahogany and old books from a man who said it the way you say the age of someone who came very close to not making it. In that 1 second, something locked into place in Tessa Calloway's chest that had no name in English or any other language. Something old and entirely without ambiguity. A certainty that sat in her body like ballast. "No," she said. The center figure moved. She turned her back on him the same instant, crouching over the pup, her arms coming up around the small silver body. She felt the blow before she registered that it had landed a force that had nothing casual about it now. 3 lines of white-hot separation across her back, from right shoulder to left hip, the impact driving her forward into the snow. The cold against her face was the only thing that kept the darkness from closing completely. She felt the warmth spreading across her back with an intimacy that was almost peaceful before her brain caught up and told her what warmth meant in this context. She turned her head. The pup was pressed beneath her unharmed. She reached behind her without looking and found a boot heel in the dark and drove it backward with everything she had left. Her whole body weight behind it, aiming by feel at the angle the blow had come from. Something crunched. A sound followed that was not a man's voice, could not have come from a man's throat, raw and animal and furious. She shoved the pup hard toward the thicket to her left. "Run," she gasped. "Go." The pup hesitated. She felt the rough warmth of his tongue against her cheek, quick and deliberate. And then he was gone, a silver flash absorbed by the darkness between the trees. She rolled onto its back in the red snow and looked up at the sky. The snow was still falling. It fell with perfect indifference to everything below. It's slow and white, and without opinion, the flakes drifting down through the cold, dark air, as they had been drifting since long before any of this, and would continue drifting long after. She thought about her mother. The way her mother looked on Sunday afternoons in the common room of the Evergreen Care Facility in Seattle, sitting by the window with her hands folded in her lap, watching the parking lot with an expression of patient, unfocused waiting. She thought about whether she had told her mother she loved her on her last visit. She was almost certain she had. Almost. She thought about the electric bill. She thought with a clarity that surprised her I did the right thing. Then the sound came. Not from anywhere specific. From everywhere. From the ground beneath her, in the air above her, in the trees on all sides, in the frozen creek bed, in the ridge above the gully, and somewhere deeper than any of those, somewhere that sound does not usually originate from. A sound that climbed the register from sensation to hearing, that began somewhere below the threshold of sound itself, and arrived as something her skeleton recognized before her ears did. Not a scream. A command. The snow stopped seeming to fall. The wind stopped seeming to move. The figure above her half shifted now. The geometry of its body. No longer the geometry of a man froze in the specific way that things freeze when the hierarchy of the world has just rearranged itself and the new arrangement is not favorable to them. Tessa turned her head toward the sound. A figure had emerged from the tree line at the far edge of the gully. He walked through the snow without sound, which should not have been possible given his size. 6'5" minimum. Broad through the shoulders in a way that good tailoring could refine but not disguise. He was wearing a black wool coat that cost more than Tessa made in 3 months, and he wore it the way soldiers wear their uniform, not as clothing but as a statement about the nature of things. His hair was dark as the spaces between stars. His jaw was the kind of jaw that geological processes produce, cut from something harder than the surrounding material by centuries of pressure. His eyes, when the flashlight beam caught them, were gray. Not the gray of overcast sky, not the gray of old concrete. The gray of a storm system seen from altitude, a gray with weather in it, a gray that moved. He did not look at Tessa. He looked at the 3 figures in the gully, the way a man looks at something he has already decided the outcome for and is simply waiting for the physical world to catch up with the decision. "You are on my land," he said. His voice was calm. Terrifyingly, specifically calm, the calm of absolute certainty rather than the absence of feeling. The calm of a man who has never once needed to raise his voice to make something happen. And you touched what is mine. The large figure lunged. What happened next, Tessa's eyes could not fully process. The man in the wool coat moved with a speed that was simply not consistent with his size, not consistent with the physics of large objects in motion, his hand coming up in a single efficient arc. His fingers closed around the throat of 200 pounds of shifting animal, and the momentum of that lunge did not carry the creature forward. It stopped, in midair. The man's arm absorbed it, held it, and then with a motion no more effortful than discarding something unwanted, he pivoted and slammed the creature into the nearest Douglas fir. The trunk was 14 inches in diameter. It broke. The creature dropped into the snow and did not move. The silence that followed was total. The other two figures made a sound that was the auditory form of a hierarchy being understood low and involuntary, a sound of old animal recognition. They began to back away. "Leave," the man said. "Tell your employer the border is closed." They ran. The woods were silent. The man turned. When his eyes found Tessa in the snow, something happened in his expression that she could not categorize. The absolute cold of his focus shifted. Not to warmth exactly, to something more complicated than warmth. Something that moved across his face quickly and was gone before it could be named fast and readable, and then gone replaced by a control that was clearly habitual and clearly in this moment costing him something. He crossed the gully floor in 3 strides and crouched beside her in the red snow, the expensive coat going into the dark wet. Without hesitation, his knees pressing into the ground like it was the least important thing about the situation. He looked at her back. He looked at her face. He said nothing for a moment. "You saved him," he said finally. His voice had dropped an octave. It was not a question. "The dog." Her voice came out thick. Her lips were going numb. "Is he okay?" The man reached out. His hand moved slowly, telegraphing the motion, and came to rest against her cheek. His skin was burning hot against her frozen face, a heat that was not the fever heat of illness, but something more fundamental, like touching the side of a stone that has been in the sun all day. "He is safe," he said, "because of you." She tried to smile. Her lips did not cooperate. "Good," she said. "Stay with me." The words arrived as a command, but the voice behind them had changed. "Tessa, stay with me." She heard her name and understood somewhere beneath consciousness that she should find it strange that he knew it, that she should be afraid or suspicious, or at least curious. But the cold had done something to the hierarchy of concerns, and that one slid down out of reach. "Tired," she said. "I know, but you cannot sleep." She felt the coat come off him, felt the pressure of it against her back, firm and immediate and agonizing, in the specific way that stopping blood loss is agonizing. And she heard herself make a sound she would have been embarrassed by under other circumstances. She felt herself lifted with a care that seemed inconsistent with the efficiency of the violence she had witnessed. 60 seconds ago, lifted and held against a chest that felt like a structural element of something warm and solid and completely without uncertainty. The snow was still falling. She was looking up at it from a new angle now, at the flakes drifting down through the dark between the branches, and she thought that from here, they looked like small, cold stars falling slowly toward everything below them, with patience and without preference. She heard his voice very far away speaking into a phone. "Get Dr. Fenwick to the manor. Surgery prep, now." A pause. "She doesn't die tonight." She thought about her mother at the window in Seattle watching the parking lot. She thought I should have told her more often. And then the cold and the dark and the sound of the snow took everything quietly, the way the tide takes things at the edge of the beach gently and without announcement. And Tessa Calloway stopped thinking about anything at all. The first thing she noticed was the smell, not antiseptic, not the particular institutional cocktail of floor wax and recycled air, and the faint chemical ghost of 100 previous patients that had become over the past 2 years of weekly visits to the Evergreen Care Facility in Seattle, her unconscious definition of what a medical space smelled like. This was mahogany, old books, lavender very faint from somewhere beyond the room. And underneath all of it, something she had no name for, something like the air before a thunderstorm clean, and charged and alive in a way that ordinary air was not. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was vaulted, the dark timber beams crossing it at intervals, and from the center of it hung a chandelier that contained more crystal than Tessa had ever seen assembled in one place outside of a photograph. The chandelier was not lit. The light in the room came from 2 tall windows on the far wall, and through those windows she could see snow still falling against a sky that had gone from black to the particular dark gray that precedes dawn. She was in a bed. The bed was large enough to sleep 4 people without any of them being aware of the others. The sheets were silk cool and smooth against her skin, and the blanket over her was the kind of heavy that felt like a decision rather than an accident. She tried to sit up. The pain that answered the suggestion was immediate and comprehensive, a white-hot architectural fact that ran from her right shoulder across the full width of her back and told her in no uncertain terms that sitting up was not currently on the available menu. She dropped back against the pillows and waited for the pain to renegotiate its terms. "Careful," the voice came from her left. She turned her head, sneezed. Sitting in a leather armchair positioned a precise and deliberate distance from the bed was a man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair, worn close to the head, and the kind of face that had started out as handsome and then been refined by a long career of paying close attention to things that mattered. He wore a white coat over dark clothing, and he was holding a manila folder closed in his lap, his thumb marking a page as though he had been reading and had looked up at the exact moment she woke. His eyes were kind. That was the first thing she clocked about him. In her experience, kind eyes, in a medical context, were either genuine or practiced. And his had the specific quality of the genuine, the warmth that comes from seeing a great many difficult things and choosing repeatedly and against the available evidence to remain warm anyway. "My name is Dr. Fenwick," he said. He had a measured cadence, each word given its appropriate weight. "You're at the Ashford estate. You've been unconscious for approximately 9 hours." 9 hours. She processed this the way you process information that doesn't fit the shape of what you were expecting, slowly and with some resistance. "The dog," she said. Her voice came out as a scrape of sound, her throat parched in the way that suggested serious fluid loss. "Is he okay?" Something moved in Dr. Fenwick's expression. Not surprise exactly, something more like recognition, the look of a man who has just seen a thing he was told to expect, but still finds remarkable in person. "He is fine," Fenwick said. "He has been asking about you." "Dogs don't ask about people." "No," Fenwick agreed. He stood, moved to the side table, and poured water from a glass pitcher into a tumbler. He brought it to her and held it while she drank, and she was grateful enough for the water that she did not think too hard about the diplomatic neutrality of his response. "You lost 3 pints of blood, Miss Calloway. The lacerations were deep, 3 of them, the longest running, approximately 14 inches. You required surgery and a transfusion." He paused. "You're healing faster than you should be." "I've always healed fast." "Faster than that," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her with the composed expression of a man who has more to tell her and is waiting for the right moment to tell it. "Where is he?" she asked. "The man from the woods." "He is handling matters." "What matters?" the kind, Fenwick said carefully, "that require his attention in the morning hours." He retrieved the water glass, set it on the side table, and returned to his chair. He folded his hands over the clothes folder. "Is there someone I should contact? Family, a friend?" "My mother is at Evergreen Care Facility in Seattle. She doesn't always know what day it is." She said this without self-pity, as a piece of logistical information. "There's no one else who would need to know tonight. Your employer at the Rusty Spoon has been informed you were in a vehicle accident and are recovering. It was handled this morning." He paused again. "Your mother's care facility has received a payment covering the next 6 months of her residency." The silence that followed this statement had a different texture than the silence before it. Tessa stared at the vaulted ceiling and the unlit chandelier and counted the crystals in the nearest tier without meaning to a counting habit she had developed in childhood when she needed to slow her brain down enough to think clearly. "Who authorized that?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I did," said a voice from the doorway. He was not wearing the wool coat. He was wearing dark jeans and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. And the contrast between that and the man she had seen in the woods was disorienting in a specific way, like seeing a landmark from an unfamiliar angle and needing a moment to reconcile the two versions into a single fact. The violence she had witnessed him perform was still present in him. She could see it, but it was contained, now ordered, the way a river is still the same river when it runs between banks. He looked exhausted. The shadows under his eyes had the quality of something accumulated rather than situational, the kind of tired that comes from a long time of not sleeping well rather than from one hard night. But the intensity of his gaze was undimmed. His eyes found her face and stayed there with a focus that made her want to look away and made it simultaneously impossible to do so. Dr. Fenwick stood, gave a small nod that was more than a courtesy and less than a bow, and left the room. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him with the precise sound of a decision being made. The man walked to the foot of the bed. He did not sit. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and looked at her the way a person looks at something they have been thinking about for 9 hours and are now recalibrating their thinking against the reality of. "The payment," Tessa said. "You didn't ask." "No. I don't take things I haven't earned." "You saved my nephew," he said. "You earned it before you hit the ground." She looked at him. "The puppy is your nephew. His name is Toby. He is 7 years old. He wandered off the territory boundary 2 hours before you found him. The individuals you encountered had been tracking him since before dark." He paused. "They were not interested in him for his own sake. They were using him to get to me." Tessa absorbed this. Her back was a steady, insistent presence of pain, informing every breath she took. And she breathed through it, the way she breathed through difficult things, generally steadily and without drama. "You said territory," she said. "Yes. And the men in the woods, they weren't men." "Not entirely, not anymore." "And you," she said, "you threw 200 pounds of something into a tree and broke the tree." "Yes. Without shifting your weight." A pause. "You noticed that." "I was lying in the snow watching you. I had limited other entertainment." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the suggestion of one arriving and departing before it could be confirmed. "My name is Damon Ashford," and he said. "I own Ashford Industries. I also hold a position in this region that does not have an equivalent in human organizational structures, but Alpha is the closest translation." "Alpha," she said, "as in Alpha Wolf." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the tall windows, the snow continued to fall against the gray pre-dawn sky with perfect patience. "Werewolves," she said. "Lichen," he said. "The term is more accurate." "Is there a meaningful difference?" "Werewolf implies transformation as a curse, something done to a person against their nature. Lichen is what we are. It is not a condition, it is a nature." She looked at the ceiling again. She counted crystals. She thought about the amber eyes of the pup in the gully and the way the eyes of the three figures on the ridge had caught the flashlight beam wrong, and the sound Damon Ashford had made in the dark that had stopped everything and reorganized the silence. Okay, she said. He looked at her with something that might have been surprise. Okay. I saw what I saw. Deciding I didn't see it doesn't change what I saw. I'm a practical person. She looked back at him. What happens now? You said humans aren't supposed to know. You have protocols. Usually, Oni said, when a human witnesses a shift, we have two options. Memory erasure, which is possible through specific methods I won't detail, or exile relocation under monitored conditions far from this territory. But, she said, but, he said. He moved then, walking around the side of the bed with that quality of motion she had noticed in the woods. The quality of something that has learned to move carefully in spaces built for smaller things. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, the same deep, improbable warmth she had felt in the gully when his hand touched her face. When I found you, he said. He stopped. Started again. When I reached you in the snow, my wolf recognized something. It is not a thing I can explain in terms that will make immediate sense to you. But the bond is real. I cannot erase what I am to you because doing so would sever something that cannot be severed without consequence. What bond? He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man engaged in an internal argument he is losing. You are my mate, he said. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Tessa looked at him. He looked back at her with the steady gray gaze of someone who has said a difficult, true thing and is now waiting for the world to catch up with it. I don't know what that means, she said finally. It means, he said, that my wolf has recognized you as his, as mine. It is not chosen. It is not negotiable. It is as fundamental as... He stopped. The muscles along his jaw tightened. As breathing, he finished. And what do I get to say about it? Everything he said, and the word came out with a weight that surprised her. You get to say everything about it. I am telling you what is true. I'm not telling you what to do about it. Those are different things. She was quiet, thinking about the distinction. You also have no scent, he said. His voice shifted, becoming more analytical, as if he was grateful for the factual ground. To lichen senses, humans have a very distinct olfactory signature. Fear, health status, emotional state. It is one of the primary ways we read the world. You have none of this. You smell like rain on clean stone. Nothing else. Is that bad? It is, as far as I am aware, impossible. And it is why the rogues in the gully did not detect your approach until you were directly in front of them. It is why Toby allowed you to touch him. And it is, I believe, connected to what you are. What I am, she repeated. I'm a waitress from Crestwood. You are also something else. He reached into his shirt pocket and set something on the side table beside her water glass. A photograph printed on standard paper, slightly blurred from digital enhancement. She recognized it immediately. The steel chain link, the stamped batch number. Tell me where you've seen this before. She looked at the photograph. She looked at him. The lease notice, she said. My boss gets one every month. The landlord changed about 8 months ago, new property management company. I've seen that logo on the letterhead a dozen times. Voss River Holdings, Damon said. That means something to you. Harlan Voss is the alpha of the River Pack. He is also the largest private property developer in Southern Oregon. He has been in negotiations with my council for 3 years regarding a territorial agreement. His voice had flattened out, the way voices flatten when they are carrying more weight than the words themselves suggest. The trap that held Toby did not come from a poacher. It came from a coordinated supply chain. Someone ordered those traps, had them placed at specific locations along my territory boundary, and knew Toby's movement patterns well enough to predict where he would be. That means someone told them, Tessa said. Yes. Someone inside. Yes. She looked at the photograph and then back at him. So the person who tried to kill your 7-year-old nephew, she said, is the same person whose company owns the building where I work. And Damon said approximately 40% of the commercial and residential properties in Crestwood's downtown corridor acquired through a series of holding companies over the past 5 years. He paused. You noticed the logo on an invoice that most people would not have read twice. That matters. She thought about the invoices. Her boss, Ray, stacked them in the wire basket by the register and complained about them, but never looked at them closely. She had looked at them because she looked at everything. Because 4 years of working a job that required you to track 12 tables, remember 14 orders, anticipate 17 needs and do all of it, while maintaining a pleasant expression, had trained her to notice things that other people's attention slid past. You need to know who inside your organization is working with Voss, she said. Yes. And you can't use your normal intelligence channels because if someone has been feeding information to Voss, those channels are compromised. He looked at her with a sharpening of focus that was different from the intensity he had been directing at her since he walked in. This was the focus of someone encountering a specific kind of intelligence they had not fully anticipated. Yes, he said. And I am, she said slowly, a person who has no position in your organization, no access to your intelligence structure, no prior relationship with anyone in your inner circle, and no scent, which means I cannot be read the way your people read each other. You see the implication, he said. I see several implications, she said. I don't love all of them. She looked at him steadily. You said I'm not a prisoner. You're not, but I can't leave. Not safely. Not until the source of the leak is identified and the immediate threat is neutralized. Voss's people will know by now that the operation to take Toby failed. They will know that a human was involved, and they will know that you survived. He held her gaze. That makes you a target in your own right. Because I know about the trap. Because you know about the trap. And because, he said with a precision that suggested the next part cost him something to say, anyone connected to me is now vulnerable. That is the mechanism. Voss is not simply trying to take territory. He is trying to dismantle everything I protect one piece at a time by attacking the things that cannot be replaced. She heard the weight in that last sentence. She let it sit without pushing at it. Outside, the sky had shifted from dark gray to the lighter gray of early morning. The snow had slowed. Through the tall windows, she could see the tree line, the dark shapes of Douglas firs, heavy with white, and above them, the beginning suggestion of a sky that had not yet decided whether it was going to clear. My jacket, she said, the one I took off in the gully. There was a keychain flashlight in the pocket. It's been recovered. My car is on the shoulder of Route 9. It's been towed to a secure facility. The tire will be replaced. The vehicle will be returned to you when it's safe. She thought about this. She thought about the $63 and some change in her checking account, the overdue electric bill, the particular quality of the silence in her apartment on Kessler Street on nights when she came home from a double shift, and the heat hadn't kicked on properly, and the refrigerator needed restocking, and the sum total of her circumstances settled around her like weather. She thought about Toby's amber eyes in the gully, the awareness in them, the hope. She thought about Damon Ashford's hand against her frozen face burning hot and absolutely steady. There's a council meeting, she said. Isn't there? That's what you're handling this morning. He looked at her without answering, which was its own kind of answer. You should go, she said. I'm not going anywhere. Something in his expression shifted at that something quick and complicated that crossed his face and was controlled before she could read it, fully changing the surface and then gone. There was a bell on the side table, he said. Ring it if you need anything. Someone will come. He moved toward the door. He had his hand on the brass handle when she spoke again. Damon? He stopped, turned his head fractionally. The invoice, she said. The one at the diner with the Voss Holdings logo. I can describe the layout of the letterhead exactly. The subsidiary name, the contact address, the account number in the footer. If you're trying to trace the corporate structure, that might help you find a thread. He turned far enough to look at her fully. I told you, she said. I noticed things. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating something fundamental about the shape of his situation. Rest, he said. We'll talk this evening. He left. The door clicked shut. Tessa lay in the silk sheets in the enormous bed in the vaulted room and looked up at the unlit chandelier and listened to the silence of the Ashford estate settling around her. Somewhere in the house, distant and muffled, she could hear the sound of people moving, low voices, the particular quality of organized urgency. She thought about what he had said. All of it in order the way she organized a busy section at the diner when 3 tables needed things simultaneously. Lycan, Mate Bond, No Scent, Harlan Voss, the trap with the batch number, 40% of downtown Crestwood, an insider feeding information to someone who had tried to kill a 7-year-old. She thought about the invoice in the wire basket by the register at the Rusty Spoon, the one Ray stacked without reading the Voss River Holdings letterhead, with the subsidiary name in the footer, and the account number she had read so many times while waiting for an order ticket that she could see it now printed clearly against the inside of her eyelids. She thought about her mother at the window in Seattle and the 6 months of care that had been paid for this morning by a man who had not asked whether she wanted him to. She thought about the fact that she was 22 years old, working double shifts to cover an electric bill she was behind on, in a bed worth more than her car, in a house that smelled of mahogany, and thunderstorms with 3 deep lacerations across her back, and a wolf's amber eyes still visible in the dark behind her eyes when she closed them. She rang the bell. When the maid appeared quiet and careful in the doorway, Tess asked for a pen and paper. She spent the next 40 minutes writing down everything she remembered about the Voss River Holdings invoice. Every word, every number, the spacing of the letterhead, the font, the watermark she had noticed once in the light from the register window. The subsidiary name in small print at the footer that was different from the primary company name in a way she had meant to look up and then forgotten about because when you are working a double shift, you forget about things that are not immediately relevant to getting through the double shift. She wrote it all down in the precise small handwriting she had developed in high school when her notebooks were always running out of pages before the semester ended. When she was done, she folded the paper and put it on the side table. Then she closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she rested, which was something, and she thought, which was something else. Outside, the snow had stopped. The light through the tall windows was gray and cold and entirely without opinion about any of the things that were happening beneath it. The Ashford estate was quiet, but it was the quiet of a house holding its breath. And Tessa Calloway, who had spent 4 years learning to read rooms, could feel it. Something was coming. She did not know its shape yet. She did not know its name or its timeline or the specific form it would take when it arrived. But it was coming the way weather comes, already decided somewhere beyond the horizon, moving steadily toward everything below it with patience and with weight. She opened her eyes and looked at the chandelier and counted the crystals in the bottom tier. She counted 63 before she stopped. $63 and some change. She almost laughed. Then she reached for the water glass, drank until it was empty, set it back on the side table beside the folded paper, and began to think about what she knew and what she needed to know and the specific distance between those two things. It was she had found a useful distance to understand. It told you how much work was still in front of you. She was given the East Wing and the gardens. Those were the boundaries. Damon had delivered them over breakfast on the fourth morning, standing at the far end of a dining table long enough to seat 20, while she sat at the near end with a plate of eggs, Benedict she had not asked for, and a grapefruit cut into precise segments by someone who had strong feelings about citrus presentation. East Wing, gardens, not the North Tower. Not the basement, not beyond the estate walls where the gate sensors would register her crossing and trigger an alarm within 30 seconds. He had said all of this while adjusting the cuffs of a charcoal suit that fitted him the way architecture fits a landscape, as though it had been designed around something that already existed. He had checked his watch, a Rolex Submariner, that caught the morning light and left without asking whether the terms were acceptable. She had stabbed a piece of ham and watched him go. "House arrest with a view," she had said to the empty room. The maid who had appeared from nowhere to refill her coffee had said nothing, which Tessa was beginning to understand was the default setting for the Ashford estate staff. On the morning of the fifth day, she found the solarium. It was tucked at the east end of a corridor lined with portraits of men who all had Damon's cheekbones and his particular quality of inhabiting a room as though the room had been built around their presence. The solarium was a glass-walled addition to the main house, humid and green, and warm enough that the transition from the cool corridor felt like crossing a climate zone. Tropical ferns and orchids she couldn't name crowded the space in organized abundance. The glass ceiling was fogged with condensation, and outside it, visible through the fog, the snow-covered grounds extended to the tree line in every direction. She stood in the entrance for a moment and let the warmth reach the places her back was still arguing with her about. Then a voice spoke from behind a substantial fern near the far wall. "You're the human." Not a question, an assessment. Tessa turned. The woman was sitting on a velvet chaise lounge positioned with the strategic precision of someone who had chosen their ground before the conversation began. She was by any objective measure stunning. Crimson hair worn loose over her shoulders, cheekbones that belonged in a different century, eyes the precise green of deep river water in summer. She wore a white silk dress that had the particular quality of expensive things, the quality of not trying, of simply being what it was without apology or explanation. She was looking at Tessa the way a jeweler looks at a stone someone has brought in for evaluation. Interested, unimpressed, professional. "I'm Tessa," she said. The woman stood. She moved the way all of them moved here, with that quality of controlled grace that Tessa was beginning to recognize as something biological, rather than practice something in the architecture of how they were built, rather than anything they had learned. She was tall. She stopped at a distance that was technically polite and practically aggressive. "Lyra Voss," she said. "My father is the alpha of the River Pack. I have been in formal negotiation with the Ashford House for the past 3 years regarding a territorial alliance." She paused. "An alliance that includes a personal component." Tessa looked at her. "You're engaged to Damon." "Engage is a human term with legal implications that don't apply to us. We have an arrangement. A formal understanding ratified by both councils, supported by 3 years of diplomatic work, and designed to stabilize the territorial boundary between the Ashford lands and my father's holdings." She circled slowly at a radius of about 6 feet. "And then you appeared." "I saved a puppy," Tessa said. "That's the full extent of my intention." "You saved Toby Ashford," Lyra said, "the only living heir to the Ashford bloodline currently breathing. You did not simply pull a dog from a trap. You inserted yourself into the center of a political situation that has been in careful balance for 3 years, and you disrupted it by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time and smelling like nothing." She had completed her circuit and stopped again closer this time. "I don't have a scent," Tessa said. "I've been told. It's apparently unusual." "It's impossible," Lyra said, which makes it worse, not better. Because impossible things attract attention, and attention from Damon Ashford is a resource that is not currently available for redistribution. Tessa looked at her steadily. The pain in her back was a 7 on a scale of 10 this morning, down from a 9 the day before, and she had learned in the past 4 days that managing it required a steady and deliberate allocation of her energy. She was not going to spend that energy on this. "I didn't ask to be here," she said. "I'm not competing with you. I'm trying to figure out how to go home." Something shifted in Lyra's expression. It was brief and complicated, and it moved through her face like a shadow crosses open ground, fast and gone before it could be fully read. Then her chin lifted and the polished surface was back in place. "Let me be direct," she said. "Damon's wolf may be confused by your scent or lack of it. That is a biological response, not a decision. Damon himself is a king who requires a queen with the political capital to support his reign, the social standing to represent his pack at alliance level, and the strength to survive in a world that kills ordinary people for sport." She let that land for a moment. "You are a waitress who got lucky. Once the situation with the rogues is resolved, he will compensate you, generously handle your memory, and return you to your life. I'm telling you this not to be unkind. I'm telling you so you don't mistake what is happening here for something it isn't." Tessa was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass ceiling, snow had begun to fall again, the flakes drifting down through the cold air with the same patient indifference she had noticed on the night of the gully. She thought about the folded paper she had left on the side table, the one with the Voss Holdings invoice details written out in her small, precise hand. She thought about Damon Ashford looking at her from the foot of the bed, with those eyes of his, and saying the word everything with a weight she was still turning over. She thought about Lyra Voss's father and the batch number stamped into the chain of a steel-jawed trap. Your father's company, she said. Voss River Holdings. Lyra's eyes sharpened. A fraction. Enough. What about it, she said. Nothing, Tessa said. I just recognized the name. The silence between them had changed quality. It was thinner now, more careful the way air gets before a change in pressure. Don't get comfortable, Lyra said. Her voice had lost some of its polish. Whatever you think is happening here, it isn't. Lyra, the name arrived like a hand coming flat down on a table. Not loud. Absolute. Damon stood in the solarium entrance. He was not wearing the suit jacket. His white dress shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing the forearms she had noticed in the gully-corded muscle and the pale tracery of old scars that his clothing usually covered. He had been working. Whatever he had been doing this morning had required something more than a boardroom. His eyes moved from Lyra to Tessa and back. I could hear your heart rate from the corridor, he said to Lyra. His voice was even, completely specifically even. You smell of jealousy? Lyra's posture changed. Barely. The kind of change you would only notice if you were looking for it. A microscopic softening of the spine, the body's old recognition of a hierarchy it could not argue with. Damon, she said. I was welcoming our guest. You were assessing her for weaknesses, he said. He walked into the room. The temperature changed, not metaphorically. She could feel the air shift around him the way it shifts around something that generates its own weather. Those are different activities. She doesn't belong here. She is here under my protection. He stopped in front of Lyra. He did not touch her, did not raise his voice, did not do anything that would have registered as threatening to an outside observer. And yet Lyra took a small, involuntary step back. If you speak to her with disrespect again, I will set aside the memory of your father's alliance and remember only that you insulted the Ashford house while standing in it. Do you understand me? The silence held for 3 full seconds. Lyra's jaw tightened. She looked at Tessa with eyes that held something that was not quite hatred and not quite warning, and was in fact more complex than either something that had fear underneath it and something that might in a different light have been recognized as desperation. Then she dipped her head, a minimal controlled gesture of submission, and walked out of the room. Tessa listened to her footsteps recede down the corridor. She let out a breath she had not been aware of holding. She said, you two have an arrangement, she said. 3 years of negotiation. Damon turned to her. The edge in his expression had not fully receded. It had shifted the way weather shifts, rather than clears the energy still present, but differently organized. We have a political framework that our councils constructed, he said. It was designed to serve a territorial function. That's not a denial. No, he said, it isn't. He moved to the glass wall and stood looking out at the snow-covered grounds, his back partially to her, his reflection visible against the dark glass. There are things in my position that are chosen and things that are inherited. The arrangement with Lyra's family was inherited. The mate bond is something else entirely. She said, you'll compensate me and erase my memory when this is over. She said what she needed to believe. Is she wrong? He turned. The reflection and the man aligned, and she was looking at both of them simultaneously. The solid fact of him and the ghost of him in the glass and the gray eyes in both were doing the same thing. That careful, focused assessment that she was beginning to understand was not intensity for its own sake, but the specific look of a person who has been lied to enough times to take nothing at face value. I told you, he said. You get to say everything. That was not a courtesy. That was the truth. She held his gaze. Your wolf wants to claim me. You said that the second morning. Yes. And what does Damon Ashford want? The question sat in the warm, humid air of the solarium between them. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, Damon Ashford wants his pack safe, his nephew alive, and the person responsible for the trap on Ridgeline Road to face a consequence proportional to what they intended. He paused. And Damon Ashford is standing in his own solarium, having a conversation he has never had before with a person who has no scent and writes invoice details from memory and looks at him like he's a problem she's deciding whether to solve. You're not a problem, she said. You're a complication. There's a difference. Problems need to be eliminated, she said. Complications need to be understood. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, Dinner's at 8. The council will be present. I need you there. Why? Because there is a person at that table who knows where Toby was going to be on the night you found him. And that person has had 5 days to watch this house and assess the situation. They will be watching you tonight. And you, he said, with a precision that she recognized as the specific form of compliment he was apparently capable of, notice things that other people miss. She thought about this. You want me to watch them watching me? I want you to have dinner, he said. And if you happen to observe something that strikes you as inconsistent, I would like to know about it. That's very diplomatic. I'm trying, he said. It came out with a dryness she had not heard from him before, and it surprised her enough that she almost smiled. I'll need something to wear, she said. My uniform is not going to project the right image. It will be handled. Damon. He had turned toward the door. He stopped. Lyra's father, she said. Harlan Voss. How long has he been acquiring property in Crestwood? He turned fully, the gray eyes sharpening to that particular focus. 5 years, he said, approximately. Why the subsidiary name on the invoice at the diner, she said. Ridgeline Development Partners. It's not listed on any public Voss Holdings documentation I've been able to find on the property management notices. It's a shell, but the account number in the footer has a specific routing prefix that I've seen on 2 other documents. She watched his face. I used to help Ray, my boss, sort his business mail when we had slow mornings. He thought I was being helpful. I was bored. But I read everything. Damon walked back into the solarium. He stopped 3 feet from her, closer than he had stood since the morning she woke, and looked at her with the expression of a man who was rapidly and without pleasure revising a calculation he thought he had already completed. What 2 other documents, he said. A lease amendment notice for the building next to the diner, she said. And a zoning variance application posted on the community board at the county clerk's office 6 months ago. I read it while I was waiting to file a noise complaint about the bar on 4th Street. She paused. The same subsidiary name on all 3. The same account number prefix. If you pull the county property records for that routing, you might find the full shape of what he's been building. The silence in the solarium was different now than the silence that had preceded it. Outside, the snow fell on the grounds, in the tree line, and the dark shapes of the Douglas firs standing in their rows against the gray sky. Inside, the orchids were indifferent to everything except the heat and the humidity and their own slow requirements. You've been thinking about this, he said. I've been lying in bed for 4 days, she said. I needed something to do. He reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and produced a small notebook, the kind with the hard black cover that people who take notes seriously carry. He held it out to her. She took it. She looked at him. Write down everything you remember, he said. Every document, every number, every name, everything. I already did, she said. It's on the side table in my room. I wrote it the morning I woke up. He looked at her for a long moment. Something happened in his face then. It was not the controlled shift she had been observing since the morning she met him, not the weather movement of contained feeling across a disciplined surface. It was something smaller and more specific. A recognition. The particular expression of a person who has been operating under a certain set of assumptions about who they are dealing with and has just understood that those assumptions were insufficient. He put the notebook back in his pocket. 8 o'clock, he said. I'll be there. He left. She stood in the warmth of the solarium for a while after he was gone, listening to the particular quality of the silence he left behind him, which was different from other silences in the same way his presence was different from other presences. More textured, more charged. She looked at her reflection in the glass wall. A 22-year-old woman in borrowed clothing with a healing set of lacerations across her back and a keychain flashlight that was probably in a drawer somewhere in this enormous house, and $47 that had been $47 for 5 days now because she had not been to work and presumably never would again, at the Rusty Spoon, and the weight of something she did not have a name for yet pressing against the inside of her chest with the persistence of weather. She thought about what Lyra Voss had said. You are a waitress who got lucky. She thought about the invoice in the wire basket, the batch number on the trap, the subsidiary name and the account number prefix and the zoning variance application on the community board. She thought about the fact that she had read all of these things separately in the course of an ordinary life, because she read everything available to her in every moment of stillness she was given, because stillness was not something she trusted, and information was the only form of security she had ever been able to rely on. Lucky, she thought. She turned away from her reflection and walked back through the corridor lined with portraits of stern, gray-eyed men toward her room to get the folded paper from the side table. Behind her, the solarium continued its patient work of keeping things alive in the cold. Outside, the snow fell on everything equally on the grounds of the Ashford estate, in the dark line of the trees and the road beyond the gate, in the 3 miles of Route 9 between here and the shoulder, where a 2014 Honda Civic had sat with a flat tire on the night everything changed, and it covered all of it without preference or distinction, the way time covers things slowly and without asking permission. And somewhere in the house in the North Tower, Tessa was not permitted to enter. Something moved. She heard it once at the edge of perception, a sound that might have been footsteps or might have been the house settling in the cold. She stopped in the corridor and stood still and listened. Nothing. She walked on, but she did not stop listening. The dress was midnight blue velvet. It arrived at her room at 6:30, carried by the silent maid, hung in a garment bag, with the quiet confidence of something that knew exactly what it was. Tessa unzipped the bag and stood looking at it for a moment. Backless, floor length, the kind of cut that required a decision about who you were before you put it on. She put it on. The back dipped low enough to show the 3 healing scars completely. She stood at the mirror and looked at them, the pale, angry ridges, that doctor. Fenwick had told her this morning were healing at a rate he could not explain clinically and had stopped trying to. They ran diagonally across her back like something written in a language she did not yet read. She thought about what Damon had said. Wear them. They're proof. She left the room at 7:55. The dining room was lit by candles and the kind of strategic overhead lighting designed to make power look comfortable. The mahogany table could seat 20. Tonight it seated 8, and the space between the 8 people carried more weight than the furniture. Damon stood when she entered. It was not a formal gesture. It was instinct, she thought, watching him, the body registering something before the mind caught up with it. His eyes moved over her once from the heeled boots to the 3 scars on her back, and something in his jaw tightened briefly before he controlled it. He held the chair to his right. She sat. To his left was Gavin Callister. She had been told about him in a briefing Damon had given her that afternoon, standing in the map room with his sleeves rolled up and his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man describing something that cost him to describe. Gavin Callister, 32, beta, childhood friend, the kind of friendship formed in early adolescence that has the density of family without the obligation of blood. They had grown up in adjacent houses on the Ashford territory. They had trained together. Gavin had been the first person Damon called when his brother died. and left Toby without parents at the age of 3. He was blond, broad-shouldered, with a grin that arrived quickly and occupied his face without reservation. He was the most immediately likable person at the table. Tessa noted this the way she noted everything without reaction. "So, this is her," he said, raising his wine glass, to Tessa, who faced 3 wolves with a stick in a bad attitude. Laughter moved around the table. Warm, genuine, the kind that builds rooms rather than tests them. She smiled and drank her water. Elder Silas Greer sat at the far end, 62, silver-haired with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow that had the age and the quality of something earned rather than accidental. He had looked at her when she entered with the expression of a man conducting a quiet assessment he had no intention of sharing the results of. "The security breach," he said midway through the first course, addressing Damon with the directness of a man old enough to be done with preamble. Silas knew the patrol routes. He knew the boy's movement pattern. That information did not leave this territory on its own. "I'm aware," Damon said. "Are you handling it or are you managing it?" Greer's eyes moved briefly to Tessa and away. "Not hostile, evaluating." "There's a difference," Gavin said with the easy tone of a man smoothing a surface. "Yes," Greer said, "there is. One produces results, the other produces the appearance of results." The table absorbed this. Tessa ate her salad and listened to the conversation layer itself around her, the discussion of rogue activity on the I-5 corridor, the supply truck that had been hit 3 days ago, the increasing organization of what had previously been isolated incidents. She said nothing. She watched. She watched Gavin Callister refill his wine glass at precise intervals. She watched his grin arrive and depart and arrive again, always at the appropriate moment, always calibrated to the emotional temperature of the room. She watched his eyes, which moved in around the table in a pattern that was almost right but not quite that, visited each face at the correct intervals, but returned to Damon with a frequency that was slightly too high for casual attention. He was watching Damon the way you watch something you are waiting to happen. At 9:15, she excused herself. The corridor was quiet, lit by wall sconces at long intervals, the spaces between them deep with shadow. She walked toward the terrace doors at the far end, genuinely needing air, genuinely needing 30 seconds outside the specific gravity of that room. She was passing the library when she heard the voice. Low. Pressed close to a specific register, the register of someone who has learned that certain conversations require a particular volume. The library door was cracked 2 inches, enough for sound to escape into the corridor while the speaker's attention remained on the room. She stopped. She did not decide to stop. She stopped. "Tonight," the voice said, "the distraction is confirmed." A pause, someone on the other end of a phone call. "Damon is occupied. The perimeter rotation changes at 10. That's the window." Another pause. "Take the boy first, the girl second, in that order." Tessa's hand came up to her mouth, not from surprise, not entirely, from the specific physical response of hearing something that confirms what part of you already knew. "Killing her breaks him," the voice said. "That's the mechanism. Without the mate bond intact, his wolf destabilizes within weeks. After that, the territory fractures on its own." She recognized the voice. She had been listening to it all evening, warm and easy, and arriving at exactly the right moments, the voice of a man who had made a career of being exactly what the room needed him to be. She backed away from the door. 1 step. 2. Her heel found the edge of a floor runner, and she caught herself against the wall. She turned and walked. Not running. Walking because running in a house full of lichen made noise that carried, and she had 4 days of observation to tell her that everything in this house was heard by someone. She came around the corner at the end of the corridor and walked into a wall. The wall caught her. Damon's hands closed on her arms, steadying her, and she looked up at his face and saw the question forming there and said, "Gavin, library, right now, he's on the phone." The lights went out at 9:47. Not a gradual dimming, an absolute instantaneous subtraction of light, and the kind that suggests not a power failure, but a power cut deliberate and coordinated and timed. "Down," Damon said, and she was already moving. The first window went at 9:48. The main hall ground floor, the tall casement windows overlooking the east garden. Not broken from outside, thrown open because the alarm that should have triggered on forced entry was silent. Someone had already disarmed it. The shapes that came through were not in human form, and they moved with the specific, purposeful aggression of things that have been given a target and a window and told the target cannot run. 3 of them. Large. The kind of lichen that Damon had described as rogue, which she understood now meant something more precise than simply wild. It meant stripped. The pack bond gone, the behavioral architecture that came with it gone, what remained being only the animal and the appetite. Damon had the fireplace poker from the sitting room in his hand. She did not see him pick it up. It was simply there, and then he was meeting the first rogue midair with a controlled efficiency that was terrible to watch and impossible to look away from. She ran for the stairs. She was on the landing when she looked down. Damon was holding 2 of them. The third was circling. From the corridor that connected to the dining room, a shadow detached itself from the darkness and became Gavin Callister. And in Gavin Callister's right hand was a Desert Eagle that caught the emergency lighting from the garden in a single brief gleam. He was aiming at Damon's back. She did not think about the Ming vase on the landing table. She picked it up and threw it over the banister in one motion. The way you throw something when thinking about it would only slow you down. It was not a precise throw. It did not need to be. It hit the floor 2 feet from Gavin with the detonation of expensive ceramic, and Gavin flinched, the barrel jerking, and the shot went wide, not wide enough. It caught Damon in the left shoulder. He staggered, turned, saw Gavin. What moved across Damon Ashford's face in that half second was the most human thing she had seen from him. Pain that had nothing to do with the bullet. Then the Alpha closed over it and he shifted. It was the first time she had seen it happen in full and from close range, and it was nothing like anything she had prepared herself for. His body did not simply change. It became itself more completely the human form shed like a constraint that had always been provisional, the animal beneath expanding into the space the man had been holding, compressed. Midnight black fur, a mass that should not have been physically possible from the starting dimensions. Eyes that were the same gray as Damon's eyes and held the same intelligence, but none of the restraint. He lunged at Gavin. More rogues were coming in through the ground floor windows. One of them reached the landing. She ran. The panic room was at the end of the east wing corridor, 60 feet, and she had covered 40 of them when the hand closed around her ankle, and she went down hard, her chin catching the floor, the world whiting out for a half second before she pulled it back by force of will and felt herself being dragged backward. She kicked, both heels alternating, targeting by feel. She connected with something and heard a grunt that was approximately human and used the fraction of a second it bought her to get her palms flat on the floor and push herself up and turn. He had her by the arm now. One of the rogues in human form, larger than she was by a factor that was not encouraging a knife in his free hand, pressed flat against her throat with professional familiarity. "Stop," he shouted down to the main hall, "or she opens up." The sound below changed. The massive black wolf that had been Damon Ashford went completely still. His head came up. His eyes found her on the landing with a precision that had no uncertainty in it whatsoever. In the sudden stillness, Gavin's voice rose from the ground floor. "Shift back, Ashford, now, or I watch it happen." The wolf shifted. It was slower going back. She understood why, without being told. The silver in his shoulder was doing something. She could see it in the way he moved, the careful, deliberate quality of each motion, the way his jaw was set against something. He stood naked in the ruins of his clothing, bleeding black from the shoulder wound, and looked up at her with gray eyes that held no defeat. Absolutely none. Gavin stepped into the light. His face was tired. That was the thing that struck her. Not triumphant, not monstrous. Tired in the way of someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has simply stopped being able to carry it. "I'm sorry, Tessa," he said. He looked up at her, and the sadness in it was real. She could see that. "This isn't personal." He turned the gun on Damon. She said, "Wait, I know where the money is." The words came out before she had finished deciding to say them, which was either instinct or stupidity, and she would determine which later. Gavin looked up. "The offshore accounts," she said. "Damon showed me the access codes. He wrote them in a notebook. I know where it is." The silence that followed had a specific texture, the texture of greed encountering something it wants to believe. "You're lying," Gavin said. "Am I?" She held his gaze from the landing with both hands steady and her chin up, and the knife still at her throat and her back a cathedral of pain. "He's been poisoned with silver. He knew he might not make it through the week. He needed someone outside the pack to hold the access information. Someone with no scent who can't be read." She paused. "Kill him and the accounts locked permanently. His protocol. You know how paranoid he is." Gavin looked at Damon. Damon's face was unreadable. He was giving her nothing, which was exactly right, because anything he gave her would be a tell, and Gavin had known him for 27 years and would see it. "Bring her down," Gavin said finally. As the rogue walked her down the stairs, she locked eyes with Damon. 9 steps, 8, 7. His eyes did not leave her face. In them, she saw the silver burning in his shoulder and the exhaustion of standing naked and bleeding in his own destroyed house. And she saw something else, something she would think about later in a dark room with cold, stone walls. A promise, not the kind made with words. The hunting lodge was 8 miles from the estate up Ridgeline Road, where the Douglas firs grew so close together that the headlights of the vehicles carrying them barely reached past the tree line on either side. The cellar was stone and cold and smelled of old rust. They shackled Damon with silver cuffs that burned against his wrists with every breath he drew, and they left Tessa unshackled because she was just a human, and what was she going to do? She was going to save his life. That was what she was going to do. She crossed the cell to him the moment the door shut above them and tore the remaining length from her velvet hem and pressed it against his shoulder, both palms flat, the right pressure, the specific technique from the wilderness manual that she had read in the library on slow Sunday afternoons when the diner was empty and she had 2 hours and nothing else to do with them. "Pressure bandage," she said when he looked at her hands. "Hold still. Tessa, hold still." He was quiet while she worked. When she looked up, he was watching her face with the expression she had first seen when she was lying in red snow in the gully, the one she did not have a name for yet. "The codes don't exist," he said. "I know. Gavin will figure that out within the hour." "I know." She tied off the bandage with the particular knot her mother had shown her once for bandaging a sprained wrist. "We need to get you out of these cuffs. The silver." "I know about the silver. Is there another way to open them besides the key?" "No." She sat back on her heels and looked at him. He looked back at her. Silver was spreading from the cuffs up his forearms in thin, dark lines visible, even in the poor light, the color of oxidized metal beneath his skin. "Then we need the key," she said. "Gavin has it. Gavin is upstairs about to discover there are no notebook codes. He's going to come back down here angry. When he does, he'll be focused on you. She held his eyes. Not on me. Damon was quiet for a moment. You're going to take the key off him, he said. When he gets close enough to the bars, yes. He could kill you. He could, she said. He won't. He needs me for the codes he thinks exist. And when I tell him they don't, he needs me to be alive long enough to watch what he does to you. She said it without drama, as a logistical fact, the way she talked through the organization of a difficult shift when 3 tables were waiting and the kitchen was backed up and the only path through was to see it clearly. Damon looked at her for a long time. Eli, he said quietly. She looked at him. Gavin's son. He died in the boundary conflict of 2021. He was 4 years old. The decision to hold the eastern perimeter that night was mine. His voice was level. Gavin blamed me. He was right to. He wasn't right to do this. No, Damon said, but he wasn't wrong about the grief. She thought about the sound Gavin had made saying Toby's name, the specific timbre of it, the practice quality, the way you speak a name you have been speaking to yourself in quiet moments for years. When this is over, she said, the tribunal, I want to say in his sentencing. Damon looked at her. You haven't gotten us out yet, he said. I will, she said. I want your word. A pause. You have it. Above them, footsteps crossed the floor. The door opened at 11:43. Gavin came down the stairs with 2 rogues and the expression of a man whose patience has cashed its last check. He stopped at the bars and looked at Tessa. No notebook, he said. No codes. Try again. They're in my head, she said. I memorized them. Then recite them. She looked at him steadily. It starts with a routing prefix. B, L-A, stop. He raised the gun through the bars. I'll shoot you in the leg. Start there. See what that does for your memory. Damon lunged against the cuffs with a sound that was not entirely human. The silver flared white along his wrists, and he went to his knees. Gavin looked at him. The gun did not waver. Something in Gavin's face broke open, just for a second. The tiredness under it, and the grief under the tiredness, and under all of it, a man who had loved something and lost it and had not found any way to live with that loss except this one. The gun came back to Tessa. She felt it then. Not the anger this time. Not the hot protective fire from the gully. Something older and quieter and more absolute rising from somewhere below the level of decision, below the level of thought from a place that did not consult the rest of her before acting. Her eyes went gold. The wave of energy that left her body had no sound. It had pressure. It had intention. It moved outward from her in all directions simultaneously, and it hit Gavin and the 2 rogues behind him, the way a concussive blast hits a wall, not violently but completely, and all 3 of them went backward, and the gun left Gavin's hand and struck the far wall, and the 2 rogues sat down hard against the wine racks and stayed there. Tessa's eyes returned to Brown. She stood in the silence for half a second, her hands shaking her ears, ringing faintly with something that was not sound. Then she moved. Gavin was dazed, blinking, trying to find the horizon. She reached through the bars and unclipped the keyring from his belt before he registered what was happening. 3 keys. The second one opened the cuffs. The silver left Damon's skin. She watched the dark lines recede. Watched color return to his face. Watched the wound in his shoulder slow its bleeding as something biological and powerful woke up and remembered what it was supposed to be doing. He stood, all the way up to his full height in the stone cellar, the man who had been on his knees 30 seconds ago, and he looked at her with the gray eyes burning. She handed him the cell door key. He ripped the door off instead. They came out of the lodge into a field of headlights. Not enemies, an army. Vehicles along both sides of Ridgeline Road, 100 yards in either direction. And at the front of them, Elder Silas Greer, standing in the cold night air, with his silver hair and his scarred eyebrow, and an expression on his face that contained several things simultaneously. The tracker, Tessa said. Standard issue, Damon said beside her. The submariner. Greer has the receiver. You could have told me. You didn't ask. I was a little occupied. Behind them, Gavin was being brought up from the cellar by 2 of Greer's enforcers. He walked without resistance, which was the walk of a man who had spent everything he had and arrived at the bottom. Lyra Voss was standing near the 3rd vehicle. She had come here herself, which Tessa had not expected. She was wearing a heavy coat over the white dress, her red hair loose, her green eyes holding something that was not the polished assessment from the solarium. She looked like a person who had been given information that had changed the fundamental shape of what she thought she knew and had not yet finished absorbing it. She looked at Tessa. My father, she said. Yes, Tessa said. Lyra was quiet for a moment. How much of it? All of it, Damon said. He said it without cruelty and without comfort, with the specific even delivery of a true thing being said to someone who needs to hear it clearly. The traps, the rogue contracts, the property acquisition, the attempt on Toby, all of it coordinated from the Riverpack leadership for the past 18 months. Lyra looked at the ground. Then she looked up. What do you need, she said. Everything you have, Damon said. Records, communications, anything your father left accessible. We're taking this to the Alliance. A pause. I have his email archive, Lyra said. He uses the same password he's used since 2019. He never thought I'd look. A long exhale. I looked. She had been carrying it. That was what Tessa saw on her face. Not betrayal newly discovered. Discovery long carried the weight of knowing something you did not want to know and not having known what to do with it. Come inside, Tessa said. Lyra looked at her. The green eyes found her face with an expression that had nothing of the solarium in it. Why, Lyra said. Not hostile, genuine. Because you're cold, Tessa said. And because what comes next is going to be hard, and you shouldn't do it as standing in the road. 2 days later in Damon's map room, with the walls covered in territorial charts and the table covered in printed documents, and Lyra's laptop open to an email archive that contained 18 months of careful criminality, the elders assembled. Greer sat at the head of the table. He looked at Tessa for a long moment before he spoke. The Catalyst, he said, is a figure we considered mythological. I'm not mythological, she said. I'm from Crestwood. Yes, he said. He had the tone of a man conceding a point. The ability activates in proximity to a true mate under genuine mortal threat. The specific energy signature is unmistakable to anyone old enough to have studied the texts. He folded his hands on the table. It cannot be manufactured. It cannot be faked. And it cannot exist without the mate bond being real. He looked at Damon. The tribunal will be called, Greer said. Northwest Alliance, full quorum. We bring Harlan Voss before a proceeding with human authorities included. He paused. The girl testifies. The girl, Tessa said, has a name. Greer looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, yes, Luna, she does. They gave Harlan Voss every procedural courtesy. He was contacted through official alliance channels. He was given 72 hours notice. He was permitted to bring legal representation from both human and Lycan frameworks. He arrived at Ashford Manor on a Tuesday morning in December with the bearing of a man who had spent 58 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered and had not yet received information sufficient to revise that assessment. He revised it within the first 20 minutes. The main hall had been configured as a hearing chamber. 142 individuals were present, alpha representatives from 6 regional packs, 4 members of the Northwest Lycan Alliance Council, Elder Greer, the mayor of Crestwood, the Douglas County Sheriff, and a federal wildlife enforcement officer whose presence had been arranged through channels that Tessa had not asked too many questions about. At the respondents' table, Harlan Voss sat with his attorney in the particular stillness of a man running calculations. Damon presented the case with the systematic precision of someone who had been building toward this moment for a long time, the territorial violations. The rogue contracts documented through financial records. The trap deployment traced through the batch numbers to a supply chain that ended at a Voss Holdings subsidiary warehouse in Roseburg. The property acquisition scheme laid out in a map that showed 18 months of shell company purchases forming a corridor directly through Ashford territory. $2,300,000 in documented payments to rogue operators over 18 months. The silence in the room at that number had weight. Then Tessa stood up. She had not prepared remarks. She had thought about it and decided against it because prepared remarks were for people who needed the structure to know what they believed, and she already knew what she believed. She stood at the witness position, and she looked out at 142 people, and she said what happened. She said it the way she had said everything important in her life, the way she had learned to speak at the Rusty Spoon, where you had 30 seconds to tell someone something true before they stopped listening plainly and without decoration, and starting with the thing that mattered most. She said she heard a sound in the dark, and she stopped. She said she found a 7-year-old with a broken leg in a trap that belonged to the man sitting at the respondent's table. She said she turned her back on 3 things that wanted to kill her because the alternative was letting them take a child. She said the scars on her back were proof of that decision, and she wore them without apology. She said she was a waitress from Crestwood, Oregon, and she was standing in this room because someone thought the life of a child was a useful instrument in a real estate transaction, and that was not something she was willing to let pass without saying so in front of as many people as possible. When she sat down, the room was quiet. Elder Greer spoke. Victor Kane spoke next. He was the oldest council member present after Greer, a man with a reputation for skepticism that he had spent the past 3 weeks directing entirely at Tessa. He spoke with the careful weight of someone who has changed his mind about something important and wants the record to reflect it. Then the Alliance representative from D.C. spoke. Then the sheriff of Douglas County spoke about the property fraud aspects, which fell under statutes that did not require anyone to explain the Lycan dimension of the situation. Harlan Voss's attorney requested a recess. The request was denied. The verdict took 11 minutes. Territorial forfeiture. Criminal prosecution under Alliance statute for rogue incitement, a charge that carried permanent exile from all recognized PAC territories in North America. Referral to federal authorities on the property fraud elements. Asset freeze pending full financial investigation. Voss stood when the verdict was read. He looked across the room at Damon with the expression of a man attempting to transmit a threat through eye contact. Damon looked back at him with the specific patience of someone who has already won and has nowhere particular to be. The sheriff's deputy put handcuffs on Harlan Voss at 11:41 in the morning in the main hall of Ashford Manor, and the sound of them closing was very small in the large room, but it carried to every corner. Tessa stood when Gavin was brought forward. I'm requesting modified sentencing, she said. Greer looked at her. Gavin Callister lost a 4-year-old son in 2021, she said. He was recruited by Voss at the lowest point of his life and given a purpose for his grief. That doesn't excuse what he did. It explains what was done to him. She looked at Gavin across the room. He was looking at the floor. Exile, not permanent, structured, with a path back if he chooses it. She paused. His son's name was Eli. Someone should say it in this room. Greer was quiet for a long moment. Eli Callister, he said. The room held it. Modified sentencing granted, Greer said. He looked at Tessa with the expression of a man finishing a recalculation. Luna. June came to Crestwood the way it always did, slowly, and then all at once the snow retreating up the slopes of the Cascades, while the valley floor woke up green and loud with birds. The Heart Sanctuary occupied the converted East Wing outbuildings of the Ashford estate. 23 residents, a medical facility, a training program, a legal advocacy office staffed by 2 Lycan attorneys who had relocated from Portland with an enthusiasm that suggested they had been waiting for this specific job without knowing it existed. The funding had come from the forfeited Voss assets. Tessa thought there was something appropriate about that. She was at her desk when Damon appeared in the doorway. He had a habit of appearing in doorways she had noticed, of occupying the threshold rather than committing fully to the room, as though some part of him was always checking the escape routes. She had started leaving doors open specifically to remove the option. Victor Kane wants the dormitory heating specs by Friday, she said without looking up. He'll have them Thursday, Damon said. He wants them Friday. Give them to him Friday. Don't make it look easy. A pause. Why? Because he spent 3 months calling me a liability, and now he brings me building specs before he brings them to you. I'm not going to take that away from him by being too efficient. She heard the sound he made, the one that was almost a laugh, and had been happening more often in the past 6 months, the one she had learned to recognize as the specific sound of a man encountering the world behaving in ways he had not modeled for. She looked up. He was leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed, and his gray eyes doing the thing they did, that focused, full attention thing that she had eventually stopped trying to redirect and had simply learned to receive. Come outside, he said. Toby's been asking for you. Toby was in the South Meadow, substantially larger than the beagle-sized creature she had held in the gully, his silver coat thick and luminous in the June afternoon light. He saw her coming across the grass and covered the distance between them in approximately 4 bounds, which given his current size was roughly half the meadow. He knocked her over. She lay on her back in the grass looking up at the summer sky, while Toby stood over her with his massive paws on either side of her shoulders and licked her face with the comprehensive enthusiasm of someone who has been waiting all morning for this specific activity. You're enormous, she told him. He licked her face again. Toby, Damon said with the tone of a man who has had this conversation before and knows how it ends. Toby stepped off her with the dignity of someone making a choice rather than being told. He settled in the grass nearby, put his enormous head on his paws, and watched them with his amber eyes that were still 6 months later the most aware eyes she had ever encountered in any living thing. Damon helped her up. He did not let go of her hand. She had called her mother that morning. Her mother had been having a good day, which happened less often now, but still happened. She had told her she loved her. Her mother had said, I know, honey, I know. And then asked when Tessa was coming to visit, and Tessa had said soon, which was true, and her mother had said good, and the call had ended the way good calls end, without any of the things that needed to be said going unsaid. She was coming to visit next Sunday. She had already arranged the drive. They stood in the South Meadow in the June afternoon, with the Cascades visible above the tree line, and the estate behind them, and the sanctuary visible through the outbuilding windows, the light moving through the spaces where things were being rebuilt. He reached into his jacket pocket. The box was small and dark. He held it out with the particular quality of someone presenting something that cost them something real to present, not money, not effort, but a specific vulnerability that he had not historically been in the business of offering. Inside was a band of black titanium with a piece of meteorite set flush into the surface, dark gray and faintly luminous. I talked to the elders, he said, about the ceremony. They said it's your choice how it goes. Good, she said. Tessa. She looked at him. I would like to spend the rest of my life making sure you are never brave alone again, he said. That is what I want. That is the whole of it. She looked at the ring. She looked at the man who had thrown a wolf into a tree with one hand and crouched in the mud beside her without hesitation and ordered surgery with the specific fury of someone who could not tolerate the alternative and who had said you get to say everything like he meant it and who had kept his word about Gavin and who stood in doorways checking exits but left them open when she moved through. She reached out and took the ring. Put it on, she said. He did. From the tree line at the edge of the South Meadow, a sound rose. Toby had lifted his head. His throat opened, and the sound that came out of him was the sound she had heard on the night of the gully, when everything was ice and blood, and the specific terror of a world larger than she had known, and it was the same sound in a completely different register, full and clean and carrying. A howl. From further in the trees, an answer. Then another. Then the whole territory at once, the voices layering together in the summer air over the valley floor, in the meadow and the 2 people standing in the grass with their hands together. Tessa Calloway, 22 years old, formerly of the Rusty Spoon Diner, looked up at the sky above Crestwood, Oregon, and listened to the world she had walked into by accident in the dark with a dying flashlight and $47 singing. She had walked into the woods to save one small thing. She had not known she would save everything else while she was at it, but she had learned in the past 6 months that this was how the important things happen. Not with a plan, with a decision made at the edge of a gully in a snowstorm in the dark with no guarantee of anything. You heard the sound. You stopped. You went in.